Sister Katherine Doyle is a Sister of Mercy trained in history and spirituality. A native of Sacramento, she received an MA in Educational Administration from USF and an MA in Liturgical Studies from St. John's University, Collegeville, Minnesota. A Mercy historian and a frequent contributor to Mast Journal. She has published Like a Tree by Running Water, The Story of Mary Baptist Russell, California's First Sister of Mercy, and the book that she's going to talk about tonight, Braided the Lives, The Sisters of Mercy in Sacramento, 1857 to 2008. Please welcome Sister Katherine Doyle.
Well, thank you, and it is just a delight for me to be with you tonight, because there is nothing I like more than to tell the Mercy story. So first, let me introduce you to Mother Mary Baptist Russell. She is the formidable woman who brought Mercy to California in 1854. She came out of Ireland with 7 other sisters, and their ages ranged from 19 to 62. They came at the request of Bishop Alemany, who was the first Catholic bishop of California. He was appointed in 1850, and what he discovered was he had a great big diocese and no workers. So he sent Monsignor Hugh Gallagher to Ireland to recruit sisters. And he found those sisters at St. Joseph's Convent in Kinsale. And when he first asked, there really was no big response. Because of Mother Frances Bridgman, who was superior, what she had heard was not good news. She had heard about the Indian Wars, she had heard about unruly people, all this kind of thing, and she wasn't really all that excited about coming. But she said they'd pray about it overnight, and the next morning the entire house volunteered to come. 8 of them came to California, but they were coming from a country that was so very different from the United States. Culturally diverse in the United States, but also they had not really quite ever experienced some of their first meetings, shall we say. One of the stories that has come down to us about, this kind of transition and what it must have been like for these early women is that the boat coming up the Pacific coast couldn't get into the shore. So you had to go out to the boat. And so the natives carried you to the boat. But of course the natives were unclothed. And so these young Irish nuns had not really been familiar with that. So Monsignor made the guys wear pantaloons to carry them out to the boat. Then they came up the Pacific coast to San Francisco. They were recruited to start education in San Francisco. There was a need for a school. Another religious community, the Presentation Sisters, were recruited at the same time, except they didn't wait for Monsignor Gallagher. They went ahead with Father Cashin, who was pastor of Sacramento, because they were supposed to come here. They heard so many bad stories about Sacramento, the weather, the mosquitoes, all of that kind of thing, that they didn't come. They stayed in San Francisco. And they told the bishop either they got to open the school there or else they were going back to Ireland. So, of course, the bishop let them stay in San Francisco. So when our sisters arrive to teach the school, they're no longer needed. So this is what you're going to find in the history of the sisters, is what they do is they go to the next most needed thing. And in San Francisco at that time, it was health care. They had no health care that was worth anything at that particular time in San Francisco. So it is at that point that they start 30 years of health care in San Francisco before they ever began to teach in schools again. Meanwhile, poor Sacramento was left, what you might say, nunless. Okay, no sisters here. And so the bishop kept begging Mother Russell to send someone. She please give him sisters for Sacramento? 3 years later, she does. In 1857, the sisters come up to Sacramento and start their ministry here, which would be 30 years of education before we started healthcare. Exact mirror image of San Francisco, okay? Now, when they came, Sacramento lived up to its reputation of not being the greatest place to come. Remember, there were no levees in these days, okay? The streets were flooded so easily. So in 1861, you have the Great Flood. And the picture that you see, courtesy of the Center for Sacramento History, is the flood downtown. See that little church in the background there? That was St. Rose Catholic Church, and the sisters taught in the basement. With the water, yeah. You know how it is in Sacramento, because the water tablet is so high that teaching in the basement is not advantageous. And the sisters were over at St. Joseph's Academy by that time. What happens is the water came out so high, they were teaching, and all of a sudden a farmer ran in saying, "I'm taking my daughter home." And in a short period of time, the school was completely emptied, and it was a sunny day. Why? Because the flooding came from the snow melts, okay, and the water coming down the uncontrolled rivers. So it flooded the house up to the second story. And what you find, and this is a great example of it here, is the sisters moved from teaching to helping the people, the flood victims, who were in the pavilion, which was over on M Street. They were on 9th and G. So what the citizens of the city did was they rowed the boats over to the second story at St. Joseph's. The sisters climbed over the banisters into the boats. Then they were rowed across town. They worked at the pavilion all day. Then they got back in the boat and went back home. Now, one of the things to know about this was you may or may not have seen this statue at the state capitol. And you might have wondered why it was there. It was placed there to honor the sisters and the work of the sisters, not only in Sacramento, but in California. But underneath that story, it's because the Capitol is built on our land. We bought it first, okay? Mother Russell bought a quarter of that property for what she thought would be the high school and convent, and the state claimed it by eminent domain. But in claiming it, they only reimbursed her for what she paid before all the prices went up. Now this is a picture, this is much later, it's from 1893. And it's to give you an idea of how big the community was during that time. It's not large. But in 1893, they had St. Joseph's, and they were spreading out throughout Sacramento with just this number of sisters. This was their center. This was the old St. Joseph's. You can see where the balconies were that they climbed over to get in the boats. And one of the reasons the Sacramentans wanted the sisters here was because they associated them with the education of women. Katherine McCauley, my foundress, was dedicated to the education and the preparation of women for a significant influential place in society and home. Now, St. Joseph's was not the first school in Sacramento, as many of you who know Sacramento history know that, but it was the first Catholic girls' high school. When we started out with about 60 kids in the school, and then within a week, it had doubled. They only went to school like maybe 3 or 4 months, and then they were back out because of the crops and the work that had to be done. We were a rural area. But this is the picture of the first graduating class of St. Joseph's Academy. This was a major marker because these women turned out to be highly, highly influential in in the story of Sacramento. One of these women was Mrs. McClatchy. Wow. And she was instrumental in having her husband really tell the Mercy story and work for Mercy Ministries over her lifetime. They didn't just teach. I want to kind of stress that. They would go out and they would walk out to the poor in their homes and the sick in their homes. We were called the walking nuns. And so walking through Sacramento in the heat of the summer out to these homes was a major, major kind of contribution to the welfare of Sacramentans. The other piece was the sisters were interested in everyone's education. And one of the things they recognized was a scarcity of books. And so what they did was they formed a subscription library, both to support the high school, but also to provide good literature and religious books as well. And they really were all sorts of genres of literature that they would provide for the city prior to the opening of the Sacramento City Library. But a big change happened in 1887 when the Sacramento Diocese was created. And our custom at the time was for every Mercy community to be independent. So we became independent in 1886. Their first superior was Mother Vincent Phelan. Mother Vincent Phelan was well loved by the Sacramento community. She also was a trained concert vocalist. Wow. And as a result, one of the things that helped St. Joseph's support itself was a extraordinary musical training for the girls. And if you look through the newspapers of this time, you'll hear about concert after concert, and they give you the names of the music, real complicated stuff, okay? Not easy. They also had to deal with the KKK. In those years, there was a lot of religious animosity. And the sisters, the community thought the sisters were off limits until such time as somebody put graffiti on their fence. And then the leaders of the KKK went after the people who graffitied the fence, because you could do all sorts of things, but you couldn't go after the sisters because the sisters belonged to everybody. We believed that no one was exempt from our care. That was our standard way of going about things. Now, how did we get into the healthcare? Because if you talk to a lot of Sacramentans, they're going to identify Mercy with the hospitals. And what you see on the screen right now is a picture of St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco. You see, at the time when the sisters were here, prior to the opening of this hospital in the late 1890s, about 1896, somewhere around in there, prior to that time, if I was what you call a private pay patient, okay, I had to go to San Francisco for major surgery. I wasn't going to be able to get that in Sacramento. So the doctors of Sacramento prevailed upon the sisters multiple times to open a hospital like the one in San Francisco. And we kept saying no. And then we had a new person in charge. And when she became a superior at the time, she really liked hospitals. And they came to her and she said yes. Her name was Liguori Madden, and she is the mother of Mercy Healthcare here in the Sacramento region. And what you see is a picture of what's called Ridge Home. That was like a private sanitarium. That's what you would have seen in the city at the time. But it wasn't kind of like a going operation. So Dr. Simmons came and prevailed upon us to purchase that hospital and to turn it into a center for private pay, okay, or private patients. However, we had no money, as usual, okay? And so she gave him an IOU. I don't know how she thought she was going to pay off the IOU since we had no money, but he accepted it. And she did eventually pay that off. But when you read the history of Ridge Home, you find out when we took it over, you know how many patients they had? 2. They had 2, and they could accommodate up to a big number. They could accommodate 8. Okay, so, that wasn't going to work. And so they built on 23rd and R, Mater Misericordia. It was 3 stories, all wood, no elevators. So what happens is as soon as they build the hospital, because we have a strong conviction of excellence, we could not run a hospital without trained staff. So we opened simultaneously, we opened Mater Misericordia Nursing School so that we would have trained staff for the hospital. And how did that work? Well, because we opened it because the doctors wanted it. Therefore, the doctors could teach in the nursing school, which they did. So there is this bond of collaboration that moves through our story. One of those persons was Bishop Grace, Thomas Grace. He was Bishop of Sacramento. And this is a picture of the Grace surgery that he endowed. Now, that old hospital, Mater Misericordia, in less than 20 years expanded 4 times. They ran out of space. Okay. Now, what happens, however, is the sisters know they need another new hospital. When the drive was going to start in 1914, the war breaks out. So they're not able to pick up the moving of the old hospital until they begin to make plans maybe around 1920 or so. So they explored like 8 different sites in Sacramento to see which one might be the best one. And the one they chose was the one where the current Mercy General Hospital is. That site was a dairy. It was swampy. Okay, and people thought we were nuts to be taking that site for this new hospital. But it worked out. It worked out just fine. And so what we have here is a picture from the dedication or the groundbreaking of the hospital. And then it was dedicated in 1925. So this year we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Mercy General Hospital. Well, there was another need in Sacramento, and you may be familiar with that need, and it was orphans. So in 1902, the bishop asked the sisters to take over a gift that he had just received from Mrs. Leland Stanford. And Mrs. Stanford had given her home to the Sacramento diocese to be a home for orphans. And so the sisters took back up their role of caring for orphans. They had done that earlier in the time of the 1860s when there were a lot of other orphans. But this one was a more dedicated kind of orphanage at the time. And they did that until 1934. In 1934, things were changing in terms of how you cared for orphans and things like that. But the big thing was that the orphanage from Grass Valley, which our sisters had conducted, was moved to Sacramento. So we closed this from Stanford Home, and these orphans moved to what we know now as St. Patrick's Home on Stockton. Next to it, you see St. Joseph's Auditorium. And I put that in because I wanted just to flag for you a little bit that we were always looking for ways that we could reach out to people who were in economic straits. And during the Depression, that was a big thing. How do you find employment for people? And the sisters and the diocese collaborated on having people who needed work build a new auditorium for St. Joseph's Academy. And that's how that academy came to be, not just to have an academy, but to have an academy that would furnish work to people who needed work. Now, one of the things that was happening during this time, because this is, you're moving toward the 1940s. Remember that the house that we lived in was from the 1860s. Wood, flood damaged, and it got condemned. Okay, so we had to find a new place, and where we found was Auburn. So when you think of the Sisters of Mercy of Auburn, we're really the Sisters of Mercy of Sacramento. But when you cross over a county line, you have to do all that kind of thing. So we had a new name, the Sisters of Auburn. But we had to promise, absolutely promise, the people of Sacramento that our going to Auburn would not take us out of Sacramento, that we wouldn't cut back on our services here because we were up there. And we were faithful to that. At one point in our history, we had administration of 14 grammar schools and 2 high schools. That's a lot of educational facilities. And not all of them were in Sacramento. There were some that were a little bit north, up by Redding. With so much going on, we needed a lot more sisters. And so what you see is a picture of Immaculate Heart Convent in Ardford, County Kerry, where we opened a house to recruit new members in Ireland to come out and work in Sacramento. So if you ever wonder why we have so many Irish sisters in Sacramento, that's why we have Irish sisters. You also had, as I mentioned, we had a lot of schools. And so one is close by. It was Sacred Heart. It was our 3rd school. It started with 2 grades, and they taught in the hall, okay, until they actually had 4 classes in the hall, until such time as they had the money to build the school. The other picture is a picture of, if you notice, it's School of Music, and that's in Auburn. Here you see St. Caroline's Sanitarium. There was a great need in Northern California up by Redding. And so they asked us, would we please open a hospital in the north? And so what we did was we bought St. Caroline's Sanitarium. It became Mercy Hospital until it actually grew to its present state. Now, same thing down here, things were happening. In 1954, we had a huge expansion of Mercy General. It was the result of a citywide survey that said that the city was short, I think it was over 500 beds. And so the city came to us and asked us, would we expand Mercy General by 100 beds? And we said, yeah, but you gotta help us, okay? So the whole city organized around that expansion. And you had, in the picture, you see Governor Knight, who was the honorary chairperson. You see Dalton Falstein, who represented the Chamber of Commerce in this whole thing. And you see these civic leaders. The bishop then had every parish in the diocese take up collections and monies for this expansion. And if you can believe it, it was funded in less than 6 weeks. At the end of that campaign, the men who were on that committee recognized that we could not do this on our own going forward. You couldn't have this kind of unplanned fundraising type of thing and have it work in the society that was emerging. And so Fred Reed and his buddies all got together and they established what we know today as Mercy Foundation. Mercy Foundation is 70 years old. And for 70 years, they have been raising money for the works of the sisters. In the 60s, when I started teaching, we built a high school, another hospital out in Carmichael, because, we were growing out in that area of Sacramento. And this was Mercy San Juan. And on that property, there was Mercy High School, where I started my teaching at the hospital. Then later, we added Mercy Folsom. And today we have those 3 hospitals, but we also work with Methodist Hospital in South Sac. But you know, healthcare and housing are 2 pieces that can't be separated. If you're not housed, you're not going to be healthy. And so in the late 80s, not only did we merge all of our healthcare system into one, so it would be more effective and more able to negotiate contracts and things like that, but we established Mercy Housing Incorporated. We have over 17 Mercy Housing properties in Sacramento, just in the Sacramento area. And they range in size anywhere from about 24 apartments to the latest one we opened downtown is 134 apartments for the chronically homeless. Mercy Housing has grown from its inception in 1981 to being one of the top 3 affordable housing providers in the country. We also got together and collaborated with the Jesuits, and the 2 of us sponsor Cristo Rey High School, a school that works, meaning kids whose families would never, ever afford a Catholic education. And they often come from schools that are not really well-resourced. And so we want them to grow to their full potential. So the Cristo Rey model puts them in businesses 1 day a week to work. So they get training for work, and then the people they work for pay their tuition. We also have what you call Mercy Peddlers, so you might see them around town. Mercy Peddlers, Sister Libby Fernandez started Mercy Peddlers. They go out taking water and hygiene materials, but most of all they take connecting materials where people can find help or who to call, that kind of thing. And they bike around all the homeless areas, meeting the people who are most in need to try and get them in touch with someone who can get them out of their situation. So I want to close with 5 guidelines that the sisters, you can go through our history and you can find these principles. The first is that mission is our North Star. If it doesn't match the mission, we're not going to do it. We have a commitment to collaboration, and absolutely every person is to be treated with dignity and honor, no matter what. Where one of us is, all of us are. So if you see one Sister of Mercy, you see one Sister of Mercy, but everybody else is there with her. And always there is a dedication to excellence.